It's November 25th, 2019, and it's time to review 5 of the most outrageous, infuriating, or just plain baffling things that have happened lately. It's your Facepalm 5. Let's count them up. Number 1, House Republicans spend impeachment hearings whining, pushing conspiracy theories. The impeachment inquiry is going about as well for the Republican Party and Donald Trump as you would expect it to go for a group of aspiring fascists closing ranks to protect their obviously guilty leader. During 2 weeks of public hearings before the House Intelligence Committee, a dozen witnesses colored in a picture that has been sketched out for some time already. President Donald Trump halted foreign aid to Ukraine, possibly an illegal act in and of itself, and tried to use resumption of that aid, plus the promise of a White House meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky, to pressure Zelensky into announcing investigations into former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden and his son. While no one testified that Trump explicitly established a quid pro quo arrangement exchanging the foreign aid and White House meeting for the investigations announcement, multiple witnesses, perhaps most notably European Union Ambassador Gordon Sondland, who was appointed to his post after donating $1 million to the Trump Inauguration Committee, who testified that he, Special Representative to Ukraine Kurt Volker, and Energy Secretary Rick Perry worked with Trump's personal attorney Rudy Giuliani, and that Giuliani made it clear to them that Trump wanted Zelensky to announce an investigation into the Bidens before he would invite Zelensky to the White House or release the withheld foreign aid. Was there a quid pro quo, Sondland said during his opening remarks? The answer is yes. Sondland and other witnesses also made it clear to the committee that Trump's desire to use a White House visit and foreign aid to force Zelensky to announce an investigation into the Bidens was well known to many people in the White House and the State and Defense Departments. Faced with this damning and largely undisputed testimony, the Republicans on the committee resorted to emphasizing technicalities. If none of the witnesses ever heard Trump explicitly demand a quid pro quo with Ukraine, then that should be the end of it, apparently. Complaining, exaggerating, and at times outright lying about the structure of the hearings to make the whole process seem like the partisan crusade of vindictive Democrats, and repeatedly pushing long-debunked conspiracy theories about how it was actually Ukraine, not Russia, that interfered in the 2016 presidential election, along with the laughable notion that it was Trump's sincere concern about political corruption in Ukraine that drove him to halt foreign aid to the country until he was satisfied it had cleaned up its act. More on that later. The thing is, Trump is guilty. He did this shit. And even if there was no quid pro quo, which there totally was, but even if there wasn't, Trump, as the president, asking the leader of another country to investigate or to give the appearance of investigating one of his chief political rivals is wrong and illegal all by itself. The Republicans are trying everything they can to distract from these, again, largely undisputed facts, pushing conspiracy theories, pissing and moaning about how mean the Democrats are being about this whole thing, slandering those who testified, many of whom are long-term State Department employees or career members of the U.S. military, pretending that this whole thing is based solely on the secondhand account of an anonymous whistleblower with an axe to grind, rather than on hours and hours of eyewitness testimony describing months of impeachable behavior initiated by Trump and carried out by numerous members of his administration, because distraction and evasion and lying are the only defenses they have. Donald Trump is a criminal. He should be impeached and removed from office. There is no legitimate argument against it. But lack of legitimacy never seems to bother Republicans when the subject is one of their own. Number 2, is Chick-fil-A suddenly pro-LGBTQ? It's not. Chick-fil-A is best known for 2 things: selling unremarkable food that some people get inexplicably excited about, and financially supporting religiously motivated institutionalized bigotry against gay and trans people. But hey, did you hear? The company announced that it's going to stop donating to anti-LGBTQ Christian organizations. Except, no it didn't. I mean, okay, Technically, it did. Last week, several major media outlets, including CNN and CBS News, announced that Chick-fil-A's charitable foundation would no longer be supporting the Fellowship of Christian Athletes or the Salvation Army, two anti-LGBTQ organizations to which it has donated in the past. And that's true. But the way this story was reported gave the impression that Chick-fil-A had experienced a come-to-Jesus moment, I'm sorry I couldn't help it, regarding its support of anti-LGBT causes and ended its support of the FCA and Salvation Army for that reason. But that's not what happened. Chick-fil-A announced that beginning in 2020, it would refocus its charitable activities, making larger donations to a smaller number of organizations whose work focuses on the areas of education, homelessness, and hunger. The FCA and Salvation Army are no longer on the list to receive contributions from Chick-fil-A, but that appears to have nothing to do with their anti-LGBTQ activities. So, yeah, Chick-fil-A is ending its support of two anti-LGBTQ companies, but that's just a coincidence. And according to Snopes, a spokesperson for Chick-fil-A said that no organization has been excluded from consideration for future support. So, hey, I have a question. Why are journalists writing for mainstream, broadly reliable news organizations like CNN and CBS News so eager to turn Chick-fil-A babyface when it has done nothing whatsoever to justify the turn? If Chick-fil-A actually had renounced its past homophobia and transphobia, I'd be all for highlighting that. Maybe it would encourage other companies to do the same. But that's not at all what happened here. This story was presented as evil company isn't evil anymore, when the truth is more like evil company slightly modifies its donation strategy, which kinda sounds like a story that shouldn't exist in the first place. Number 3, hashtag decease the Snyder Cut. Speaking of things that probably don't and definitely shouldn't exist, a bunch of people still want Warner Brothers to release Zack Snyder's director's cut of his Justice League movie. Because that's the best way to improve a film, by making it more like Zack Snyder wanted it. Snyder, you may recall, stepped away from the film following a family tragedy, and Avengers director Joss Whedon was hired to finish it. Snyder had completed principal photography, but Whedon directed reshoots and oversaw the completion of post-production. When the film premiered 2 years ago, it was met with a shrug from most people, generally regarded as an improvement over Snyder's previous DC Comics-based films Man of Steel and Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, but still not very good. After the film's underwhelming release, fans of fascist pornography, I mean Zack Snyder movies, began to demand the release of Snyder's original version, apparently under the impression that the problem with Justice League was that it wasn't darker, an hour and a half longer, and utterly humorless. The social media hashtag Release the Snyder Cut has trended off and on ever since, but it received a boost a little over a week ago when Gal Gadot, who plays Wonder Woman in the film, tweeted it and was subsequently retweeted by her co-stars Ben Affleck and Ray Fisher, and by Snyder himself. There are two major problems with the suggestion that the studio should release the Snyder Cut as I see it. First, it might not even exist. Snyder has said that he has a copy of his cut of the movie, and he's reportedly even screened it for a few people in private, and the New York Times reported that Whedon was shown a version of the film before he was officially hired to take over from Snyder, but these are almost certainly rough cuts, without finished visual effects or soundtracks. Many fans who have been calling for the release of the Snyder Cut talk like Warner Brothers has had a finished film just sitting on a shelf somewhere that it spitefully refused to let anyone see, but the truth is it would cost additional money to complete the film, which, to reiterate, was already completed 2 years ago. Second, if the Snyder Cut is actually released, it'll definitely be terrible. I'm not sure whose idea it was to turn the cinematic fate of the most iconic superheroes ever over to the guy who made 300, one of the most shockingly blatant glorifications of violent authoritarianism ever produced by Hollywood, not to mention a tedious, pretentious bore, but that has proven to be a poor choice, both creatively and commercially. Snyder's DC films have not only been terrible, they've also made far less money than those produced by Marvel Studios. If you had told me 10 years ago that the first live-action Justice League movie would end up grossing $200 million less than the third Thor movie, I'd have laughed in your face. But somehow, against all odds, Zack Snyder made it happen. But all is not lost for fans of grim, bloated, self-important superhero films. The sudden support of cast members for the Release the Snyder Cut hashtag has prompted speculation from the Zack Pack. They would hate that name, so it's definitely what I'm calling them from now on, that their longed-for, shittier version of this already shitty movie may soon see the light of day, may even be released next year on Warner Brothers' upcoming HBO Max streaming service. I'm sure that will make them happy. At least until they see the trailer for Natalie Portman's Thor movie or whatever the hell else they decide to start shitting their pants about next. Number 4, SPLC Report details Trump advisor's white nationalist ties. 2 weeks ago, Hate Watch, the Southern Poverty Law Center's blog dedicated to monitoring the activities of right-wing extremist groups, began publishing a series of reports examining over 900 emails sent to editors of the far-right website Breitbart by Stephen Miller from March 2015 to June 2016. During most of the time he was writing the emails, Miller worked as an aide to then-Senator Jeff Sessions. He later joined Donald Trump's presidential campaign and now serves as a senior advisor to Trump in the White House, where he has been the primary author of the administration's cruel and capricious immigration policies. The emails were leaked to Hate Watch by a former editor at Breitbart who was fired in 2017, and their authenticity has been confirmed. Miller writes primarily about race and immigration. Hate Watch reports that 80% of the emails it reviewed related to those subjects, and relentlessly vilifies non-white people in general and non-white immigrants in particular. The first entry in the series reports that Hate Watch was unable to identify a single passage in any of the more than 900 emails where Miller writes sympathetically or neutrally about non-white or foreign-born people. Hardly surprising, given who we're talking about, but what might be a little surprising, although again, probably not if you've been paying attention, is how frankly white nationalist Miller comes across. This is a man who was first an aide to a United States senator and then an advisor to a major presidential candidate who sent the Breitbart editor a link to a story from white supremacist website VDare, who recommended the racist novel The Camp of the Saints, which dramatizes the Great Replacement myth, which is so popular among white nationalists, and repeatedly promoted material from the Center for Immigration Studies, an anti-immigration think tank which the SPLC lists as a hate group. Much of the CIS content Miller pushed in the emails found its way into stories published on Breitbart. At times, Miller writes as though he were a Breitbart editor himself, issuing orders to the actual Breitbart editor with whom he was corresponding, including directives about where particular stories should appear on the website. If it sounds unusual and highly inappropriate for a member of a senator's staff and an advisor to a presidential candidate to dictate the content of a news website, it is. But keep in mind that Breitbart is not now and has never been a legitimate news site, a fact which is confirmed in Hate Watch's series by the former Breitbart editor who provided the emails, who says that no one at Breitbart ever questioned Miller's editorial influence. The Hate Watch series has led to calls for Miller's resignation or dismissal from the Trump administration, which is great, though I doubt it'll go anywhere. But here's my question. Why weren't these people calling for Miller's resignation from the moment he got the job? Because while the Hate Watch report is full of details we never had before, the big picture is nothing new. Stephen Miller is a hateful, paranoid, authoritarian white supremacist who isn't fond of any non-white folk, but who harbors a particularly vicious animus toward non-white immigrants. And he's been in charge of crafting immigration policy for the United States for nearly 3 years. And we've known this stuff the entire time. I'd say this is not normal, but he's been there this whole time. He kept his job through the Muslim ban and the choking off of refugee resettlement and family separation, so it kinda is normal. And that's our fault, because it shouldn't be normal. Now it's time for the segment devoted to some of the other things Donald Trump has done recently to disgrace the presidency and embarrass and or endanger the United States and the rest of the world. It's number 5, the further misadventures of Lord Dampnut. Please keep in mind, as always, the following is not a complete list. So, back to that whole impeachment deal. I mentioned back in segment 1 how Trump halting aid to Ukraine may have been illegal all by itself, regardless of whether or not it was part of a quid pro quo deal. I want to talk about that for a minute because it was brought up during the hearings before the House Intelligence Committee week before last by Laura Cooper, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russian, Ukrainian, and Eurasian Affairs. During her testimony, Cooper was asked about concerns she and other government officials had about the legality of aid to Ukraine being arbitrarily halted by order of the president. See, the thing is, that aid, as is ultimately the case with all federal expenditures, was appropriated by the United States Congress. As those of you who studied American government in school may recall, the Constitution gives the House of Representatives the power of the purse. If Congress authorizes the appropriation of funds for a given project, the president can't just unilaterally decide not to spend the money. That's not to say the president never has any ability to control the flow of government spending. In this particular case, there were apparently legal methods of suspending the aid to Ukraine, but none of them were utilized. Trump simply told his chief of staff to tell the Office of Management and Budget to cut off the aid. Republicans on the committee tried to justify it, citing Trump's supposed concern over Ukrainian corruption, not a valid excuse since it had already been determined that Ukraine was meeting established anti-corruption standards, and Trump's general dislike of foreign aid, not a valid excuse because it doesn't matter what Trump thinks of foreign aid. Congress already appropriated the funds. It's not his money, and it's not his fucking call. You know, the amazing thing about this whole impeachment fiasco is that any one of these things Trump has been accused of should be enough to force his removal from office. But he didn't do just one of them, he did them all. And we're still having to argue about this. Moving from money that doesn't belong to Trump to money that shouldn't belong to Trump but now does, last week the Washington Post reported that the Secret Service paid over $250,000 to Trump's private businesses during the first 5 months of his presidency. Many of the payments directly correlate with Trump's numerous personal visits to his own golf courses, meaning that the Secret Service, which is funded by American taxpayers, is paying Donald Trump's businesses so that it can protect Donald Trump. You'll often hear right-wingers like Trump and his supporters bitterly complaining about the redistribution of wealth. Isn't it funny how that only seems to bother them when the wealth is to be redistributed from the rich to the poor, not when it's the other way around, which is the direction it almost always goes? One last point about Trump and money. Last week, amidst ongoing efforts by the House Oversight Committee to obtain his financial records, Trump tweeted, "I'm clean, and when I release my financial statement, my decision, sometime prior to election, it will only show one thing, that I am much richer than people even thought." That can only mean 3 things. 1, he's definitely not clean. 2, he's definitely not much richer than people even thought. And 3, he's definitely not releasing any financial records before the 2020 election. But, you know, at least he's consistent. He said he'd release his tax returns prior to the 2016 election, too. I don't remember that happening. Do you? Maybe I forgot. Like how Trump has completely forgotten ever knowing all the people who testified against him about his many crimes. I thought he said he had a good brain. I'm starting to think this guy might not be very reliable. That's 5. Speak out, act out, resist, look after each other. Hey folks, hope you got something out of this one. If you did, please click like, share the video, and subscribe to this channel. And also please consider helping me to continue making videos like this one and like all the videos I make on this channel by supporting this channel with a monthly donation through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives and become a patron of this channel for as little as $1 a month. But if you can afford it and you think I'm worth it and you pledge $5 a month or more, you get yourself a shout out at the end of the Facepalm 5, just like these folks, my newest $5 or more per month patrons. And their names are Rocky Gregory. Thank you, Rocky. Ben Douglas. Thank you, Ben. Adam Overeducated. Thank you, Adam Overeducated. Navion. Thank you, Navion. And Dan Pierce. Thank you, Dan. Thanks to all of my patrons, however much you are contributing, however long you have been part of the Patreon campaign. I literally could not do this without you. Speaking of my Patreon patrons, I just want to offer an apology to all of you. I already posted something about it on my actual Patreon page yesterday, but yesterday was supposed to be my monthly hangout with my Patreon patrons that I like to do, is to sort of keep in touch with everybody and have a little fun with my patrons, and I wasn't able to do it. I've just been swamped with work. I was getting this video ready, and I've been working on the video that's coming out later this week, so I just did not have time to do it, so I apologize for skipping it this month, but next month we will be back on track for the monthly patron hangout. So I just wanted to put that out there and say I'm sorry. Also, programming note, usually there is a video up on this channel every Wednesday. This coming week, there will not be a Wednesday video. There will also not be a Friday video, and that's because this week's Steve and Stuffy episode is the Thanksgiving special, and it will go up on Thursday, Thanksgiving Day itself. And because of that, I'm not doing a Friday video or a Wednesday video, just one additional video this week, and it'll be on Thursday, the Steve and Stuffy Turkey Day Riff video, and I'm really looking forward to finishing that, and I hope that you all enjoy that because it's one of my favorite videos every year that I do. So that's it. That's what's coming up on the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate it. I could not do it without your support and your help, and for those of you who celebrated along with me, happy Thanksgiving this week, everybody. I'll see you next time.